Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Garage Gym Athlete Podcast. I'm Jerred Moon, and welcome to part 5 in our programming series. So if you're just getting with me on this one, we are 5 episodes deep into going over our hard-to-kill programming methodology, which is a balancing act that optimizes performance and longevity. So being able to do a bunch of cool stuff while also living a long time, having the fitness, mobility, and resilience to live a long, healthy life without the injury, without the back problems, all those kind of things. That's ultimately what we're trying to balance in the hard-to-kill programming methodology. And like I said, you're in the 5th episode. The first 4 parts, we went over the strength continuum. So strength, speed, strength, and speed. Now we are opening a new can of worms, another continuum, and that is the endurance continuum. So over the next 4 episodes, I'll be talking about endurance. We'll kick it off today with aerobic endurance, then we'll go to muscular endurance, strength endurance, and then lastly finish out the continuum in power endurance. Now, what you have to know is this is not some scientific method. I did not pull this from a textbook. This is actual hey, here's what we've done over the years. Here's the method that we've developed. This is a very unique training methodology that's specific to us. We created it. This is what you can expect at Garage Gym Athlete. And so a lot of these things can overlap. Strength, speed can overlap. Aerobic endurance, muscular endurance, strength endurance, these things can overlap. But I like to break them out in individual components because it makes sure that we're making really well-rounded athletes. And another reason I like to go through these continuums is because if I say that there's a continuum, what I'm basically saying is that there are prerequisites. So if you go back through the strength episodes, you wouldn't train speed, which is the 4th element, 4 deep into the continuum, without having trained strength, speed, and speed strength first. So there are prerequisites. And that's the same when we get into the endurance continuum. There's power endurance is at the end of this. You wouldn't want to go train power endurance if you don't have some strength endurance and then a base of muscular endurance and then some aerobic endurance if you don't have just endurance in general. So these continuums, think of them in your head as hey, prerequisites. You need to go through these in order for the best possible results. And this is the last continuum. I'm not just throwing all these continuums at you, but if you just want to file it away in your brain in a very simple way, it's hey, the first strength continuum had 4 components. The next endurance continuum has 4 components. That's 8 deep, and we're only going into 13. So, and we're hitting 2 main areas, strength and endurance. We're just breaking them out way more refined than people typically do. So what am I talking about aerobic endurance? Well, aerobic endurance, the aerobic system is so important. In fact, in the 13 different areas that we train, 3 of them are aerobic endurance based. So today I'll talk about aerobic endurance. Later we'll talk about the oxidative training, which is more how we apply interval training to building a high aerobic base, maybe more threshold based training. And then we'll talk about mixed modal aerobic, which is where you're kind of doing a circuit or grunt work. Think about carrying a sandbag and then doing some jump rope and some push-ups or some pull-ups, then having a little bit of rest and then doing that on repeat for 40, 60 minutes. That's mixed modal aerobic. But today I'm talking about aerobic endurance as just a base layer to your training. I'm not talking about threshold, any upper end zone training. Really, the predominantly is going to be zone 2 training. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about this base layer. When I talked about strength and the strength continuum, I talked about how just base strength it's the base of the pyramid, right? If you want to be really fast or powerful, you have to have a very strong base. The wider the base of the pyramid, the taller it can be. In strength training, you do that by just having really good foundational strength through either hypertrophy training or powerlifting, just getting stronger, right? And the same is true in the endurance continuum. So the base of the pyramid here is just straight up aerobic endurance, and we can build that through zone 2 training. So zone 2 training, I have done a lot of information on. So if this is something you want to nerd out on or geek out on, it's also gained a lot of popularity. So you can find other resources that aren't just my podcast or the Garage Gym Athlete podcast. But if you search our feed, we've done so much. And we've talked about zone 2 so much, I'm not going to be able to condense it all down into, one 10-minute episode like I'm doing right now. So if you really want to geek out on it from how we've tested our blood lactate to get in the most accurate zone 2. We've done those things. We've talked about a lot of the science behind zone 2, how to burn fat and like why that matters and how that's different than like weight loss, like just so many facets of this, but it's really not complicated. It's gained a lot of popularity over the last couple of years. We've been talking about it for, like a decade. Ultimately, all you need to know is zone 2 training is just the base. It's just laying the base for everything else that you want to do. So as we want to build muscular endurance, strength endurance, power endurance in this continuum, you're not going to be able to do that with a massive aerobic endurance base. And I don't need to sit here and go through all of the science with you on aerobic endurance. Like, we know it helps you reduce injuries. It makes you more versatile. It's going to enhance your physical resilience and performance. And like, it has a broad application across multiple domains. Like, just know aerobic endurance, specifically zone 2, is ultimately, it's like the king, right? It's like, along with strength training, like it's the king of everything else. It's just a low to moderate intensity work that helps you live longer. It's going to give you better cardiovascular function, increased stroke volume, and a higher mitochondrial density, just so many different things. So how do you train zone 2? Well, if you're not doing the blood lactate method like you can go see in our other podcasts, you're just going to be shooting for 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. Also a big fan of the MAF method, which is maximal aerobic function. It was coined by Phil Maffetone, who's a famous endurance athlete, and he just does 180 minus your age. And there, again, even that, there are some levels of complexity and nuance to that, but the base of that is pretty solid for finding out your heart rate where you should train. So 180 minus your age is another great indicator there. And so that's where you're going to want to be. How you execute this, it doesn't really matter. Like, if you can maintain that heart rate in longer runs, walks, rucks, biking, rowing, ski erg, it doesn't really matter. However you want to do it, you're going to get that aerobic base, and you will find out the more you do this type of training, you'll realize like, wow, I recover faster. I'm able to tackle harder training. It's really the base of general physical preparedness. So it lays the groundwork for higher intensity training in the future. And that's the main reason we want to do it. Yes, there's a lot of science and studies and talk out there these days about how zone 2 training and like going back to that mitochondrial density, how it's going to help you live longer and all these things. But I really feel like the pendulum has swung too far. And this is typically what happens in the health and fitness space is, people, everything's like a race to put out information. And so when we first started talking about zone 2 training as base, the pendulum was like way over to the left. No one really cared. And then everyone found out about it because it became so popular that it swung all the way to the right, to where people were like, oh yeah, you got to train 6 to 7 hours of zone 2 per week, and that's the only way you're going to see any benefits. And it's like, people don't even train 6 to 7 hours per week. So what I want to tell you is you don't need to worry about it that much. Just get some low base aerobic training in. So this can be once a week. You can throw it in 30, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. Typically, you'll be able to handle that heart rate zone, that 60 to 70% or 180 minus your age. Like, you'll be able to handle that for a really long time. And so it's up to you how much time you have. But I like lower intensity stuff. I really enjoy like a ruck. These are the best ways to do it. But the reason I tell people not to stress out about it is because there's this other major factor called life that is predominantly spent in zone 1 and zone 2. And so if you are putting in a lot of movement throughout your day, my personal belief is that you are getting plenty of this aerobic base that I'm talking about, not just by sitting around and doing nothing. I'm saying if you have a lot of movement throughout your day or you're active, you are getting a lot of this. And I don't think it has to be at a specific heart rate, perfectly all the time. I think if you can just get more movement throughout your day, if you actually track your steps and you're like, hey, I want to get 15,000 steps, 20,000 steps, or 10,000 steps, whatever the goal is for you, you're going to be checking the box here. Then also training it once a week, maybe twice a week, where you are going specific to that heart rate It's 30 to 60 minutes, maybe up to 90 minutes if you have the time, and you will be light years ahead of everyone else. And that's the main thing that you need to think about when you're thinking about this aerobic endurance training. It's really just it enhances the body's ability to use fat as a fuel, which is crucial for endurance. So it's going to make you better, like on that metabolic flexibility side of being able to switch between fuels, between glucose and between fat. Like, it's going to help mitochondria, but also it just gives you that base. Like, going back to why we actually care about it, gives you that base to be able to tackle harder training. And it's absolutely super, super important, but also super simple. I've already kind of tackled how you should go about it and why it matters. I'm going to get way more in the weeds in the next couple episodes when we talk about muscular endurance, strength endurance, and power endurance. But aerobic endurance, I kept this one really high level because it's not complex. I think people overcomplicate how to improve aerobic endurance. Get a lot of movement throughout your day, set a step goal and achieve it, and then 1 to 2 times per week, hit that 60 to 70% of your max heart rate, or 180 minus your age, whichever method you want to calculate, and target that, like I said, 1 to 2 times a week in whatever modality that you want, whether that is rucking, rowing, running. It doesn't matter. However, you can just kind of stay in that heart rate zone and be there for a decent amount of time. I think you'll have this box checked. And it's also, we're going to hit the aerobic system, like I said, 2 other ways after this within this series. So not a super challenging one to cover here. And to be honest, I don't really need to sell anybody on the purpose or why you should be training aerobic endurance. It is very, very important to your training overall. But that's it for this one. For all of my garage gym athletes out there following along in the series, I really appreciate the feedback. Thank you so much for listening. And you're just getting a little bit more behind the scenes of how we program our unique method here at Garage Gym Athlete. For anybody who wants to figure out how to get the strength continuum, the entire endurance continuum, once we get to energy systems and the mixed modal training and how we hit all 13 areas of these every single month in our hard to kill track at Garage Gym Athlete, just go to garagegymathlete.com. I'm going to break down the whole system. You can sit around and program it yourself. But